Ladies and gentlemen, our program will now begin. Please welcome the CEO of the Churchill Club, Karen Tucker.
Thank you so very much. Welcome to the Churchill Club. Tonight's program is called Data Privacy Trends 2014, and we are privileged to have with us a remarkable group of speakers, starting on the end with Chris Babel from TRUSTe, Michelle Dennedy from McAfee, Barb Lawler, Intuit, Jeb Miller from Jafco Ventures, Jeff Rabkin from the California Department of Justice, and of course our moderator, Fatemeh Khatibloo from Forrester Research. Welcome, and thank you all very much for joining us this evening. We'd like to especially acknowledge TRUSTe for their partnership and their support in making this event possible. Together, we developed the event in commemoration of the annual January 28 Data Privacy Day, and it's about making people and groups aware of privacy and data protection matters. We really appreciate this annual opportunity to convene and talk about what's just ahead of where we are today. For our new guests in the audience, a brief introduction to Churchill Club. It's the top independent technology and business forum in the Silicon Valley region. And we're in our 29th year, and what drives us every day is to encourage innovation, economic growth, and societal benefit. And we do this through the up to 40 programs that we present each year, where like minds can convene with one another, and hopefully with a whole lot of new ideas. Our next program is a breakfast in Palo Alto on February 13 on the topic of scaling excellence. We have Bob Sutton and Huggy Rao from Stanford and John Lilly from Greylock Partners. On February 19, also a breakfast. We are going to look at what's next with wearables. The speakers include Thad Starner, who is a wearables pioneer and technical lead on Google's Project Glass, and Eric Friedman, who's a co-founder and CTO at Fitbit. If you're tweeting tonight, please do use the hashtag Churchill Club, and you'll find other Twitter codes in your printed program. Our moderator, Fatemeh Khatibloo, is Senior Analyst at Forrester Research, and there she studies issues around the shifting consumer data ecosystem, including how privacy issues impact marketing and customer engagement, and how privacy-compliant data sharing between and among organizations can reduce risk and increase profitability. Her research has been featured in major publications, including the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and also CNBC. She has contributed to Harvard Business Review, Financial Times, provided commentary on NPR and the BBC, and we look forward to the very important conversation that she will lead for us tonight. Please give your warmest Churchill Club welcome to Fatemeh Khatibloo.
Sound a lot more impressive than I think I really am.
Wow.
So thank you all for joining us this afternoon. This is a tremendous panel that we've convened, and again, thanks to Churchill and to TRUSTe for pulling this together. It's very rare in my experience to have everybody from sort of legislators, policy folks, to venture capitalists, and practitioners of privacy on one panel. So very, very excited to do this tonight. I'd like to take a moment and ask each of you to introduce yourselves and tell me how you define privacy as we get started.
Oh my gosh, okay. Well, the first part's a little easier than the second part. My name's Jeff Rabkin, and I'm Special Assistant Attorney General. I work for Attorney General Kamala Harris. My role in the office is to be General Harris's principal policy advisor on issues relating to law and technology. In terms of my background, I'll just talk a little bit about that because it gives you a sense of sort of how I approach some of the issues we'll be talking about tonight. Is I started my career as a civil litigator and tried cases for, well, first I was at Gibson Dunn, and I understand there's a Gibson Dunn contingent here. I left Gibson Dunn and went to work for Louise Rennie, who was the city attorney of San Francisco, and I tried cases on behalf of bus drivers and police officers and firefighters and whoever else would get themselves in trouble. And I went from there to being a criminal prosecutor. I was a federal prosecutor for 8 years. My wife and I actually moved back to New York City, where we're from, and I was a prosecutor there in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Brooklyn, where I mostly spent time sharpening my teeth on criminal organizations, street gangs, all the way up to transnational drug cartels. And as a result of some of the work there, I also got involved in counterterrorism work as well. So that's my background. In terms of privacy, look, I think it's a great opening question, right? Because it's such a tough question to answer. I will say that it's very clear that different people have different answers. And what privacy means to me is very different than what privacy means to people half my age and my children and things like that. Interestingly, my office recently charged a revenge porn case out of our San Diego office. Interesting case, fascinating issues, but that case made it very clear to me that people have very different notions of privacy than I do when it comes to what they take pictures of. Young people, I think, have different notions of privacy than older people, and different cultures have different privacy. But ultimately and fundamentally, I think we can all agree that privacy has something to do with being, in the words of Justice Brandeis, left alone, being undisturbed, being unobserved. And I don't know if I'll be able to articulate this, but in my thinking about privacy, I have started to think that privacy is necessarily tied to the idea of the inner life and the ability to be an individual, to individualism, which I think is very deeply rooted in American culture. Anyway, I'll stop there.
That is a very tough act to follow, but I'll do my best here. So my name is Jeb Miller. Hi, everybody. I'm with a venture capital firm down in Palo Alto called Jafco Ventures. We're about a 10-year-old firm focused on early stage investments in cloud computing, security, analytics world, all of which have increasing interests in the world of privacy. I've been in venture capital for about a dozen years now. The rest of my esteemed panel will probably have forgotten more about privacy than I will ever know, so please, if you have hard questions, aim right or left as those come up. But I'll do my best to provide an investor perspective. I would define privacy as sort of an individual's right to manage their own personal information and increasingly digital information, and businesses ensuring that they're handling that information in an appropriate fashion. But it's definitely becoming an increasing topic across the range of startups that we work with.
Great, thank you.
Hi, I'm Barb Lawler. I'm the Chief Privacy Officer with Intuit. Before Intuit, I was the first Chief Privacy Officer at Hewlett-Packard. I've been involved in privacy issues, technology issues, data issues since 1999. So some folks consider me kind of an old-timer in the world of privacy, at least in the age of modern digital privacy. I am not an attorney. My background is actually business, technology, and data management. And I got into privacy when someone said, do you want to do this thing where you need to talk to marketing people and tell them how not to spam people? Before there was a spam law. And just a small challenge, make HP a world-class privacy program, which I feel really proud that we did, and then have had the chance over the last several years to come to Intuit to do the same thing. I am a Bay Area native, born, raised, and schooled in San Jose, California. So I can also speak to, I think, really the history of the Valley before it was even called that.
Lindbergh High School, San Jose.
All right, Camden High School, which doesn't exist. It's a shopping center. There's an irony there,
Yeah,
or at least a joke somewhere.
That is funny.
Yeah. So here's how I think about privacy, and I'm guessing how all of you do at least a little bit, which is I think you wouldn't be here in this room if it wasn't personal. So I think first and foremost, privacy is personal, which is somewhat what the first two gentlemen were talking about. So while it means different things to different individuals, I think ultimately what it means is the right to know and understand what decisions are being made about you, to not be intruded upon, and to have autonomy. Some people talk about anonymity, and I think that's something slightly different, but to have autonomy in your own life and to be able to make decisions or know that decisions are made about you in a fair and honest way.
That's a really hard one to stop.
So hi everyone, I'm Michelle Dennedy. I'm the Chief Privacy Officer of McAfee. Before that, I started a project called the Identity Project that initially was addressed to startups that were doing really creative things with data, but very, very quickly became a child advocacy site for the growing crime of child ID theft and human trafficking. And I continue that advocacy work today, even at McAfee. I've just co-authored a book. I've got to learn how to shamelessly pump it. It's called The Privacy Engineer's Manifesto, Getting from Policy to Code to QA to Value. And because my strong belief is that privacy from the enterprise and the personal perspective at the end of the day is about authorized sharing. It is about communities, whether you feel like having a community of sometimes your subset is 0 and that's the right to be left alone, and sometimes your set is everyone who happens to be awake on Facebook when I happen to be traveling in Israel and feel like chatting with you. So I think building that into the fabric of our lives and our cultures in a multicultural setting is really where I get very sticky and work with everyone from 2-man garage startups to massive governmental entities to keep it all safe on top of all of that. So while we're keeping things private at McAfee, we also are very aware that the security risks are very real, the bad guys are very real, and the risks are real. So we try to balance the desire for community and the real desire to keep those communities safe.
Wow, I'm going to be fifth and probably say a lot of the same things, but I'm Chris Babel, the CEO of TRUSTe. I've been with TRUSTe for a little bit over 4 years, and before that, I was actually at VeriSign at the end there running the security group, and I was there for about 10. So I think one of the perspectives that I bring to the table, and I got asked this a lot early on, and it took me a while to understand the difference between security and privacy. In security, we would go out and one of VeriSign's big business was SSL encryption, and we just told you what encryption level you were going to use. The consumer had no choice whatsoever. This is secure enough. This is not secure enough. And we're not going to give you the not secure enough one, so don't ask, don't request. That's it. We made the decisions for you. And in privacy, I very quickly learned that it is this very individual thing. People have dramatically different dials in terms of what they're comfortable with. That can be age-driven, that can be demographic-driven, that can be parts of the world, that can be a variety of different things. But it was very interesting, and I quickly learned that when reporters in those first couple of weeks were like, oh, you're the new CEO, what does privacy mean to you? The best response I could give was, I have no idea. What does it mean to you? Because it is this very, very personal thing for each of us as individuals.
Great, thank you. So I want to key off a few things that resonate here pretty loudly, and it's individualism is a big one. And I want to ask, in the context of what's the biggest problem with privacy today, I think individualism, that understanding and self-awareness of what privacy means to you is pretty lacking and difficult to describe for most people. Is that the biggest problem that we have in the privacy world today, or is it perceptions of data ownership? Is it education for consumers? Is it just egregious misuse by companies? Jeff, do you want to start there?
Yeah, from the regulator's perspective, one of the things that I see as a big problem is the gap in knowledge between what the average person understands about the architecture of digital technology and what's really going on. And I think that one of our missions at the Attorney General's office is to try to generally raise the level of awareness and increase public education and sort of help teach the average person more about what's going on. I think if more people understood the privacy implications of what they did with their mobile devices or online, then market forces would probably more effectively be brought to bear on some of the issues that we're going to be talking about tonight. So that's my perspective.
Okay. Barbara, I want to go to you for a minute on the same question, because you've built these privacy practices from the ground up several times now, and I'm curious if you have seen consistency over this problem of what is the problem of privacy.
So when I think about what is the problem of privacy, I actually don't think of it as a problem. So I might actually even reframe the question, which is, what is the opportunity? And I like to actually start first with, what is the business opportunities? So what the dialogue is today is around using data and big data and rapid data innovation. So the opportunity actually is, how do you use data about individuals, about consumers, about your company's customers in a way that is consistent with their expectations, which I realize is very contextual and somewhat nebulous, but in a way that's also ethical and responsible. And so I think part of that means companies, whether you're a startup or whether you're more established, need to be accountable and say, we're accountable for certain actions, security, compliance, responsibility, but that we also have an opportunity, and I would say an obligation, to actually find benefit, to find new ways to provide new services, new products for consumers, because that's the exciting part of data. So that's kind of a non-traditional response from a privacy officer. So if there's a problem with privacy, now picking up on the other thread, is there's a tendency, I think, to try and take a set of rules or constructs, whether it's data classification or whether it's this definition of personal information or that definition of personal data or someone else's own definition, and try and ascribe a very rigid, structured set of rules and definitions to something that actually is very contextual, and it only focuses on the negative side. What can go wrong? What can go bad? And I think you need to anticipate that, but you also need to balance that with what's going to actually provide benefit for the customer, the consumer, and what actually helps the company grow and provide new opportunities, but doing that in a responsible way.
I love that. I want to key back to that in a minute, but I want to go to you first, Michelle. This idea of privacy sort of being a cost center or a risk mitigation tool, that's sort of fundamentally a problem. How do companies get their businesses out of that? How do you actually move away from this compliance-oriented view of privacy?
Yeah, so, and this is also a question, I think, for our friend in venture. I think there's nothing wrong with calling something that is at its base something about humanity and something about the humanities and assigning a value to it. And I think the minute you assign a value to something, you start to get entrepreneurial about it. And the minute you start to get entrepreneurial about it, you start to create markets. And so yes, that it does cost you something to hire someone like me to come and work for you and create rules and practices and things, but at its core is we should be, in my view, at the enterprise level, value creation engines. So you can stand on top of a platform of usable data if you have built-in ethics. I have a 4-part test for any engineer that comes along, apart from the design principles that we've built in from a privacy engineering perspective. But A, is it legal? That's the baseline. And I think where it becomes a cost center for companies is if they stop there. Because legal is just bread and butter on the table, right? Does it meet a business requirement or imperative? So few of us read the 10K reports that are absolutely publicly available. Where is your company going? You've stated that, and your CEO gets to go to jail if they violate that. Good thing to read if you're someone getting out of cost center mode. And then you get into questions of morality and ethics. And regardless if you're dealing with a multinational, and all my companies to date that I've worked at have been multinationals, there is a common thread of morality and ethics. There are maybe different choices to be made, but you can articulate where you think you hit on that scale. So if you've hit legal value, business efficacy, moral and ethical value, suddenly what you'll find is something that people like. And things that people like are things that people are willing to pay for, either with time in terms of employees investing their time in learning what the rules of the road are and engaging in them, or investing as in cold, hard cash, having a non-churn relationship, a feeling that brown fizzy water that is called Coke is somehow better than brown fizzy water that comes from Safeway in a no-name can. And I love you, Safeway. I know you're local, so if you're here, I do love you. I shop there a lot, as you know from my loyalty card. We'll talk later. But I think that's where value creation and privacy really do and can be married. If you're only doing it for legal compliance, you're wasting your time. You will never get it right.
And so are you saying that the companies that you work for actually have sort of privacy and ethics as a core business value, as a core corporate value?
You make more money when you treat data about human beings ethically, whether they are, so all the companies I've ever worked for, and most of the companies in the Valley are at their core, their base is really goodwill based. It's fuzzy logic and fuzzy math from an evaluation perspective, but I guarantee you know what the salaries are of that CTO that you want to keep and retain.
Yep.
You know what the engineering's cost. You know how hard it is to get them and retain them. How many donuts at Google have you guys bought just to keep those guys there? You know, you want them to play like Pong after dark so that they're sitting at their desk. Those costs are made because you're after something intangible, human capital, human talent, The same is true for churn and wanting people to engage in you as not just a discrete licensing buy. So we sell security in the cloud, essentially, right? So every time you turn your device on, we're silently back there in the cloud. If you are churning through our services and we aren't delighting you, or we're mistreating your data on the back end, there are choices. You know, Paula's right over there. You can buy her stuff.
There's a really interesting tension there, though, with particularly the social media consumer-facing entities, where the market is really rewarding the ability to target and leverage data and pinpoint consumers. Right? Facebook's an amazing case study in the privacy space. We were unfortunately not investors in Facebook, but so this is all an external perspective. You remember their audience started with our kids who couldn't fathom what privacy meant, thought it was fascinating to share what they ate and what they bought and credit card information, anything, right? And as the audience matured, there started to be a lot of backlash. Remember the whole Beacon incident and sharing information. And then now they went public, and the market hammered them for not having a mobile strategy, which basically means, are you not able to infer data and creepily watch your data so you can target them with ads on a repeated basis and monetize the mobile device? And now that you figure that out, here's another $50 billion in market cap, good job. And at the same time, you have that tension of not taking it too far, right? So it's a really interesting time, like particularly on those social media tools where there's a lot of value to be delivered in leveraging data, but you have to be careful in how it's used.
But think about Facebook for just a quick second. How did they leapfrog over MySpace and Friendster and these others in the market? Why? Because Dana Boyd put out some research in particular about MySpace, calling it the denizen of creepy, or something like the denizen of perverts or something. And what Mark Zuckerberg was brilliant at, what did he create? A privacy service. Yes, I'm only here to look at girls' boobs at Harvard, but guess what? They're Harvard boobs, and I'm a Harvard boy. So the velvet rope of authentication was .edu.
Yeah.
And the only people that could get in were really smart, good kids. That is the ultimate in privacy. Now, as it exploded out and his market got bigger, he sort of forgot his homegrown strategy, but his business grew. He got sticky customers, he got play, and he got users using a privacy strategy.
It's an interesting perspective and one that I haven't heard before. I'm going to noodle that for a minute here. While I do that, though, I want to think a little bit about this idea of the sort of the marketing and the business organization beyond engineers, beyond technologists, starting to learn and understand what privacy means to the organization. This is a very difficult thing to sort of socialize in a company. So Chris, can you talk a little bit about how some of your clients see marketing or privacy as something the marketing organization has to support and the business has to support?
Sure. So certainly in playing off some of the things that you said, Michelle.
Not the Harvard boobs, that's
no,
not
that
good.
was, I wasn't going to go there. We'll save that for later.
This is a
A
Stanford
few
crowd,
more drinks
I'm
and we'll
pretty
get no. I think the big thing that we see is at the end of the day, what is it coming down to for particularly everyone from the enterprise customer to the small business? They're trying to create trust with the consumer. So it gets back to a lot of the things that Michelle said. What we find ourselves really at its core helping businesses do again and again, it's maximizing the value of all this data that they can get in kind of a privacy safe way. And what's difficult about that is oftentimes it starts with there's a compliance law that says I must do X, so someone in the law team go deal with it, right? I heard something about AB 370, which says I need to disclose whether I do honor do not track or not. I don't even know what do not track is. Somebody go deal with it, right? And that's oftentimes where it starts. Or I hear about this thing in Europe, and we're getting European consumers coming to our site. Something about they can opt out of cookies. I don't understand. And so you often see this housed in legal, seen it housed in compliance. But what it really happens is as you start that conversation and think about those kind of more ethical issues of what am I trying to do with my brand to gain the trust of consumers, and it's not just a consumer play, oftentimes it's other business customers as well, it really starts to envelop the whole enterprise. So you very quickly get from a compliance legal type discussion into a marketing discussion of what's our brand message, what are we trying to do, what's the line that we think we can't cross, how does that evolving over time? If I'm Facebook and I move from web to mobile, what can I grab off the mobile device? What'll be okay, what won't be okay? And these things have much broader implications than just the compliance or the legal team. And then of course at the end of the day, you gotta tie in that third group, right? Which is the IT team, who's building stuff for marketing as fast as they can. They're understaffed, they're trying to do it quickly. And mistakes happen. I mean, when you talk to the guys at Path who we helped kind of certify after their incident where they were pulling a lot more data than any consumer expected off the contact list into their phone, that was a developer moving quickly. He had a goal of allowing you, when you downloaded the app, to sync to your friends. That's logical. That makes sense. You expect that app to do that. But they grabbed the entire contact list, not just the emails. They didn't encrypt it and hash it so they could do a match without actually pulling every email. They pulled every single thing in the contact list, and they did it in an unencrypted way, right? And so all three of these pieces need to get together, because if that lightning bolt hits you and someone from Jeff's office calls you, like, that's a really crappy day, right? And it's not a crappy day for the IT guy or the compliance guy. I mean, Jeff's going to turn out to be great, but you don't want that call. You don't want that call, because it means you've screwed up, right? Unintentionally, intentionally, you've screwed something up. And that's when consumers distrust you, other businesses distrust you, it can go to fines, et cetera. But at the end of the day, it touches all three of these audiences, and that's what really drives it across a business. And it needs to be thought of from the ground up. When you're designing systems, when you're implementing systems, a lot of what, I haven't read the book yet, but I'm certain it's in there.
It's really good. You'll love it.
But it's a lot of those things that we talk about. It starts really at the core and touches all aspects of a business.
So, you do want Jeb calling you, and that's a different kind of lightning bolt, right, if you're a startup. Can you talk a little bit about what it's like for the startups that you're working with and the new technologists that you're working with? Are they thinking about privacy differently? Certainly in enterprise and companies that have been around for decades, we see them sort of recalibrating now and starting to think about their systems and their products and their design differently. How do the startups do it? Are you seeing exciting stuff out there?
Yeah, absolutely. When there are incidents like Path or Facebook, it certainly catches a lot of attention, right? It's oftentimes startups are moving so fast and furious, especially in a world of iterating product, that both with security and privacy, it's often hard to slow them down to make sure everything is fully in compliance until there's an incident. But if you have a consumer-facing business, I think the startups have learned the damage that can happen to your business if you have a visible security or privacy issue can really impact that momentum. And a lot of these startups, particularly on the consumer side, are very momentum-based. So you can lose your audience really quickly. And there are companies that have shut down over bad privacy policies, sharing of data. If the younger generation or any users start to think that your service is creepy, you can lose your audience overnight. So it definitely is starting to percolate. I don't see a pitch these days that doesn't have the term big data in it. If you don't have big data, it's like old company, go see somebody else, right? It often raises the question of like how long and what are you doing with this data? Why do you need to capture that amount of data and sit on it for 5, 10 years? How are you sharing that data with other people? I think that's a fascinating problem, especially in mobility, right? Because I think on the mobile side, people view the mobile device as a personal device, and that's where the creepiness factor starts to impact consumers. And I think the other interesting dynamic, because we do a lot in security, is the poor IT guys, particularly in a mid-market firm where they're under-resourced. I mean, the days of when an employee shows up and you provision them a ThinkPad and a BlackBerry and you have control of what device they're using, what applications they're downloading. Now they show up with their own device, their own apps, their own cloud content. They bring in their porn with them to the office. Now you're backing up their porn that you didn't know was there. You're liable for it. They bring in trade secrets from their company. You're syncing it to your Box or Dropbox account. It's really hard. And so the management of that data, and as more and more of these apps get delivered via the cloud, they start sharing data. And now the app providers themselves have an issue of who's doing what with my data, right? I'm Salesforce, but what is this little vendor doing with this Salesforce data? So privacy is starting to really impact in our big veins of cloud, mobile, social media. It's a big issue.
And just jumping in there, would you agree that investors are getting more focused on this?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a question we ask. It's a lot like IP issues or security issues, right? It's something we have turned down companies because we thought the targeting, especially when you get into something like the dating or social media, friend finder kind of things, those are areas we are very cautious with.
Big data, it's a big one. You talked about bring your own device. That's another trend that's really changing how companies actually can see privacy and look at privacy and security. There are obviously others, Internet of Things, wearables. I mean, we could go on and on with the stuff that's going to impact privacy tomorrow. How should we be thinking about the problems of privacy tomorrow? What are the big ones that we're really facing? Barb, do you want to start us off?
So when we talk about big data, I actually think you cannot separate that from cloud and mobile and the Internet of Things. So think of mobile devices as expanding to a much broader category of connected devices. So that is everything from your wearable, your fitness device, it's connected cars, it's connected appliances, it's smart desks. Some of you perhaps read there was a publicized hack last week that went through a smart refrigerator. So password protect your refrigerators. How many of us were thinking of that?
It's a new Weight Watchers app.
I've always loved that business plan, though. Like, you go, you open the fridge, you get a gallon of milk, and somewhere somebody milks a cow. I think that's awesome.
Yeah, if only it worked that way. Yes, that's what I hope.
I have heard of that for about 10 years.
Yeah, well, we're always hoping for that, but unless you're lactose intolerant, and then that's a whole different discussion. But when I think about where are things going, and it goes back to what I was saying earlier about some of the challenges around privacy and big data is that they feel like at opposite ends of a spectrum. I actually think they can come together, and I think that where they can come together is, I think of big data and data experimentation. So we use a lot of lean startup methodology at Intuit. And so one of the things we do is, and what I've worked with our data scientists is, let's experiment. And when you're figuring out what the algorithm is, before you actually define the algorithm, that should be as open and opportunistic as possible. When you start to fine tune and test that algorithm where that might be making decisions, thinking about that definition of privacy, that might affect individuals or groups of individuals, that's when you should start thinking about what are the rules, what are the considerations, what are the legal requirements potentially, what are the promises you've made, and I think at the center of all is what does the customer, the consumer, the potential consumer think or expect. There's that sort of creepy or ick or, which is impossible to quantify. But when we think of connected devices, if we think there's a lot of data out there now in our current world, when we get to the true state of the Internet of Things and all of the little devices that communicate and talk with each other, if what we're seeing today are stars, that's stardust.
Yeah.
And how do you regulate stardust? You don't. So how can you, what you end up doing is thinking about what does it mean to be in these different stages, and what does it mean to host that, put some security that's hold on loosely at one stage, and then more tightly at the next stage, and then be very careful at the actual implementation, application, live production setting.
Yeah.
So I think when we think about where are things going, and I think where is there opportunity to think about those stages of big data and connected devices across an incredible spectrum, and I worry about the security of those devices, so I think there's some opportunity there.
I would love to ask you the same question, Michelle, keying on the identity work that you've done. So can you talk a little bit about identity in the context of privacy and what that means in the future?
Yeah, so it's fascinating to me that we can ever have a conversation about identity management without talking about privacy. Identity management is simply the tool that deals with the corpus, and the corpus is, of course, privacy. It's about aspects of you and authenticating yourself or sharing the aspects of yourself, breaking down the persona into its kind of cascading pieces in data. And this is where I think it gets really interesting, this whole thing, because I totally agree with Barb. I mean, the buzzwords, big data, cloud, grid, whatever we're calling it this week, it's simply laying out kind of what I think of in my mind as almost the periodic table of data elements and computing elements, right? You get to zeros and ones really quickly here. They have to move somewhere. Someone has to manage them, and they have to go away somewhere. Well, after you've all read and bought several copies for your loved ones of the Privacy Engineer's Manifesto, after you're done with that, Mother's Day is coming, Valentine's Day says that. You should buy a book that's called Trillions, and it's by a great friend of mine named Nikki McManus, who came out of Carnegie Mellon. And the book Trillions, and I won't be a spoiler alert for the book, but it really is about within probably less than 20 years from now, we will go from 1 billion nodes of sentient compute power, sensor networks, Internet of Things, to 1 trillion. And these numbers, when we think about DC and budgets and things, they mean kind of nothing. But if you think about 1 billion seconds ago, actually I kind of had the same hairstyle. We were feathering our hair and all pretending to be Farrah Fawcett with leg warmers on. It was 30 years ago. If you think about 1 trillion years ago, that's 30,000 human years ago in seconds. No one was speaking, no one was writing. I mean, God forbid there wasn't a computer, and if it was, an alien brought it.
Yeah.
So if you think about going from 30 years ago to 30,000 years ago in terms of management of that much data, what we're going to have to do is do what nature does and get a lot more organic. There are systems that create what is known in artificial intelligence as competency without comprehension. We can make synthetic assumptions about things. We can get pretty darn close to saying, once you get down to the 0 and 1 decision, go or no go, share or don't share, dissolve, don't dissolve, it's beyond adding metadata that has a timeout time. It's beyond what we think about now as file type computing. I think that's where we're going, and that's where security actually will kick in, because you will understand that everything will have a life cycle built into the actual fabric of computing. And it sounds kind of freaky deaky hippie, but we're actually not that far. And I think that's where we're going with true big data analytics and predictive analytics.
I actually also just want to add on to what Michelle was saying. When we think about identity, I think what I think about, and a little bit what I worry about, but first what I think about is, if we think about mobile and cloud and the idea of different mobile devices that can access your data anywhere, and that's the beauty of the cloud, and that's the beauty of mobile, then why wouldn't identity itself be a cloud-based service? So I think of personal cloud-based identity as something that I think that's part of the next step.
Yeah.
But we talked about security and identity proofing and authentication proofing. There's another side of big data that, dare I bring up, which is one of the groups, loosely organized groups, that really make extensive entrepreneurial use of big data are cyber criminals.
Yeah.
So if I think there's an opportunity to prevent, predict, stop those people at the door or at the moment, recognize them in the moment, I think that's actually one of the biggest opportunities for big data.
Yeah, and I'll jump on that really quickly, and I know I don't want to make it just a two-man conversation, but quickly, I mean, I don't think biometric authentication is in the future. It's currently in development, certainly by companies like ours, but if you think of any tool, identity management or biometrics, as the silver bullet, you will fail. Eventually, we're going to run out of body parts for people to hack.
Yeah.
So, that becomes
Literally?
literally. Can you imagine, like, authentication? Pretty soon it gets a little unseemly.
Yeah.
But if you use it in the fabric of the rest of the life cycle of what we're planning for, and you're doing this, you think I'm joking? Cars. How else are you going to authenticate yourself? Then I think you have something.
So both of these issues bring up something that we didn't really talk too much about talking about, but I want to bring it up now. And that's the idea of sort of peer-to-peer privacy, you and me. We've been talking a lot about enterprise privacy and how as an organization do you build privacy into your products and your practices. But we're quickly getting to the point where if somebody comes to my house and I've got a bunch of connected devices, thermostats and fridges and so on, they're constantly being authenticated in my home. Do you guys, Jeff, talk and think about this today in the context of what are people's requirements to keep data safe and private for their guests in their home or the people that they're interacting with?
To be candid, I don't think that's a focus of our thinking, and so I'll probably just pass to my colleagues on that. I mean, it is a fascinating topic, but we're more focused on, some of the privacy implications of law enforcement technology, but I'll get to that later and let my colleagues address that.
Everyone's looking at each other, and I'm like,
I certainly think, healthcare is an area where data is becoming, there's a huge opportunity around more and better services and more personalized medicine and data. And I think there's a lot of excitement about these wearable devices now. But you can certainly see a scenario where maybe all that data you don't necessarily want to share with other people, right? So I think that will start to become an issue.
Well, and you're also seeing the real world and the virtual world munging together, right? So we have a partnership with ADT, for example, where you're sitting in your office, but what do they want to steal when they go into your home?
Right.
It's your devices, it's your information. So how are you managing making sure not only the lights are off, but that your devices are secure when you're not actually proximate to them? And I think healthcare is another good example of that, you know, real world, protect your stuff, but also protect your physical self.
You guys are all scaring me. I'm going to have to take off mine.
Well, I almost ask,
it a
where
Fitbit?
is
So
the
if I work out, do you get
boundary
credit?
of
Yeah.
the network?
Yeah, that's
I mean, there's sort of a presumption that the network is in our home or in the coffee shop or in our office, but the reality is if you've got a fitness device and you've got connected devices at home and you're bringing your own device to the office, I think it's all one big network, quite frankly. And so then how do you think about who sees what, and also, quite frankly, the burden on consumers, individuals. How much do you really want to engage in making those decisions? And I think that's actually one of the biggest challenges for, at the end of the day, every product we make, every service we sell is for a customer, a consumer somewhere in the world. And if it's too much of a burden on them, we know they're pretty focused on a task or a set of things they want to accomplish. We're doing some usability testing right now around mobile privacy notices as we look at the NTIA, Mobile Transparency Code of Conduct. And what we see over and over is that consumers, and we think our consumer base is indicative of the country as a whole in many ways, is they care about who's selling your data, who you're sharing it with, and they want to conduct a specific set of tasks, and they don't want to read through a bunch of policy stuff. They're only going to look there if they're worried about something. They're very task focused, which is I want to use the product, service, application, opportunity for a specific set of things. Don't tell me a bunch of other stuff. And because it's a cognitive burden.
totally right.
And on one hand, we feel like maybe consumers don't know as much as they should, and we should teach them more, and that's a little parental. But on the other hand, actually we find consumers are pretty smart, and they actually understand. They may not want to think about it or spend any time thinking about it, but I think more and more, actually, as these issues are more in mainstream media and even mainstream TV shows and radio commentary, that there's more and more sort of embedded understanding of how at least some of these things work. And I almost throw a question back out to the group, which is, and what's so bad about targeting?
What's so bad about
targeting? Why is targeting?
I mean, one of the examples I was going to give a little earlier, if you've ever been to TRUSTe offices, we're actually right next to the Westfield Mall, so we're kind of wrapped around it. And so we just think about these things because that's where we eat lunch every day. But when you try to piece together all the things that are now able to happen, we think about targeting oftentimes in an online context. Oh, this ad's targeting me, I'm getting retargeted because I looked at these pair of shoes on Zappos, and now this blue pair of shoes is following me around and make it stop, right? Like I didn't like the blue one, I wanted
How
the
did
red
you know
one,
that?
it's showing me the blue one, whatever.
You're creeping
it is,
me
right?
out now.
But this is starting to move to our kind of our real world. So, you know, a lot of press about how, you know, Westfield Mall has free Wi-Fi. And why do they have free Wi-Fi? So you connect to it. But even if you don't connect to it, they know you're in the mall. They know your MAC address, your phone. Well, that's great. They know where you are within 250 feet. Great. Well, they're also starting to put Bluetooth sensors in that mall. Why? Not because you're going to connect to it, but so they can see you within 25 feet. And the video cameras at, you know, Nordstrom's, Bloomingdale's, I don't know if they do this or not. I'm just making up examples, so I shouldn't probably pick on them. But they're both, you know, tenants of the mall. You walk into the store, and they know that 75% of the time you turn right. Why do they know that? Because the camera tells them that. When you walk by that billboard, it's now got a camera in it. It's doing facial recognition on you. Not to say it's Chris Babel or that I'm even unique. Right now, it's just saying, you're male, you know, don't give them the shoe ad, especially not the blue one. But these things are starting to happen more and more. And if Facebook can use facial recognition to be able to tell, hey, this is your friend, would you like to tag them? Certainly those cameras soon enough are going to be good enough to tag you uniquely. Well, oh, by the way, when you walk up to the cash register, you swipe that card, we all know from the examples out there with Target and the, you know, the pregnant mom, even if you don't have a loyalty program, they're watching your credit card. And if you think about the fact that, oh, and by the way, my credit card expires every 3 years, so that, you know, they kind of lose track of me. When you buy online from at home and you ship it for the same name, the same email address, and the same home address, but with a different credit card, they tie that together. And last but not
It's
least,
easy.
the facial recognition works all the way through, and they have 4 years of old CCTV tapes in this back storeroom because it was too hard to destroy them.
Yeah.
So they rerun them all, and it's not only a go forward thing, it's a look back 4 years.
Yeah.
So they know everywhere you've been in the store. They know everything you've ever bought. They've been marketing to you. They know that you looked at this pair of shoes versus that pair of shoes for 20 minutes on a Tuesday from 1 to 2. You should have been in the office upstairs at TRUSTe busting your ass, but I digress, salespeople who are in the room. But then where this stuff gets, some people, back to your point, love that. Hey, I looked at those shoes. I walked away from them twice. Give me the 20% off coupon. I'll buy them from you. Other people will say, oh my gosh, that scares the living crap out of me. I opt out of the facial recognition thing, and how do I do that? I smile in a camera, and you take a picture of me, so you can keep track of me, so you know I opted out.
Yeah.
Like, this is the point where you start to say, how does this work? And I don't try to fearmonger this, but this is the technology that's pretty close to being all tied together, and that's what makes this all really, really challenging. Because some consumers will say, give it to me. I want it. I want the offer. I want you to know those things, because you're going to give me something unique, something special, something more targeted, and other people are on the other way. But that's where the technology is giving us the capabilities to do.
So we actually refer to this as the privacy personalization paradox, because it feels, it's a very quick descriptor of exactly what this problem is, right? Many people want privacy, many people want personalization. They're not mutually exclusive groups. How do you give them both? I know you wanted to jump in. So
Oh, no, I was just having, as you were talking, Chris,
You
I
wanted
was
the
thinking
blue
that.
shoes.
Yeah, I
One of the blue
like those
suede
blue
shoes.
shoes. But no, I was thinking, targeting is more controversial in some areas than others. But where I'm starting to hear people really have issues with it is with dynamic pricing. And I was curious to know if the other panelists sort of feel the same way. But that seems to be really a hot topic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Some people like it, some people don't. But it's definitely controversial where they're using my data or data about me to decide how much to price something.
Yeah.
The implicit assumption, I think, is that, well, they're going to charge me more, but I don't think that's necessarily accurate. It just seems to be controversial.
It's not, and I think the exciting thing is that, and this is where big data becomes another paradoxical thing, right? So the reality is that most guys at 2 p.m. turn right when they walk into the grocery store. So there have been studies done on how people behave in the grocery store and where food is placed, and Walmart does this extensively. There comes a time when you have enough data about enough people in a given kind of physical meat world culture that you actually don't need to track, because think about all those transactions and all those servers. Bless you, please buy more servers. I like blue shoes and I can buy them legitimately the more servers you buy. But to get someone to buy a $20 book somewhere, say, for example,
Privacy and engineering.
oh, privacy engineering, you've now spent about $5,000 to acquire one customer that may give you a one-time hit. Whereas the reality is a lot of us are very stereotypical, and you can get bulk data, bulk predictions, give almost every female who comes in at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, during a lunar eclipse, a $20 coupon for, ding-dongs and movie tickets because she just needs to have a good cry. That becomes something that you can actually depersonalize because it becomes testing consumer behavior in silico. And then you can have interesting things and interesting businesses like at register bidding, where you can get dynamic pricing, and there, we'll have a whole host of other regulatory issues for people knowing enough to dynamically bid at the register, but you won't be wasting my time.
I think it's a great point. It's something we press entrepreneurs on hard, which is when you're collecting all this data, what are the insightful analytics you're enabling, right? The consumer health fitness one's a great one, right? We have constant companies coming in and talking about how they can measure, every minute of your sleep and every step and everything you've eaten. And what's the conclusion of all that data of thousands and thousands of measurement points? If you eat less and exercise more, you'll be healthier.
What?
That's the analytical insight, right? And that is true in retail too. I think there's a lot of really cool ideas. It's fascinating with me how many brilliant engineers out of IIT, MIT, Cal, Stanford, all these places, kill themselves to squeeze that incremental penny out of the ad tech ecosystem.
When they just need to go to a party.
But that little bit of targeting can really reward them.
And I think there's some interesting stuff here. I know we only have about 10 minutes left, shockingly, before we go to Q&A. But I think there's some really interesting threads around disintermediation. Right here, we're talking about ad blockers, and some of our research says that 27% of adults in the US have actually turned on and use an ad blocker plugin. That's a significant number. What is the other stuff that disintermediates this ad tech ecosystem or the marketing technology and analytics ecosystem?
Some of it's bad design, quite honestly. It's not the ads per se that I want to block. It's just that they're not pretty, they're not interesting. I mean, people will watch full-on shows. My daughter was watching a full-on show about Super Bowl commercials. I thought, isn't this why we got a DVR? So we don't have to watch these things?
We
But they're
love Super Bowl
full-on
commercials.
shows.
Come on.
Because they're funny and they're interesting and they're well designed. And I think the better and more successful of these ad technologies will be more beautiful. Same thing for lawyers, by the way. I mean, I think our next policy that I'm working on right now, and talking about testing, Barb and I love to test things. You know, who here recognizes the movie Dennedy, Dennedy? Come on, who's
Josh.
with me? Who doesn't swim anymore at the beach? It's Josh. In an instant.
Yeah.
Why don't we have musical scores for our legal terms? Why? Why isn't there a warning number? Why? Because currently it's annoying. But I think the next generation is these ads need to get more interesting. And I think that's the biggest thing, not even a privacy thing. I think it's ugly.
Design, cognitive burden,
Yep.
which I mentioned before, and particularly as we move more and more to mobile devices, connected devices. Traditionalists in privacy talk about notice and choice. Well, where do you put notice and choice in any of those? The concepts are obsolete. The implementation is obsolete. And when we think about in a global environment, you have to think about literacy and other issues, which means maybe not musical scores, although outside my office I did hear a Star Trek clip of music that was from, I can tell you which Star Trek original episode it was from, which is really sad in many ways. But we respond, no, actually it was Ponfar. But we're all triggered by different cues. So actually when we go back to identity and authentication and what works for us, but I think we need to think beyond word language heavy things, and that's part of the ugly prettiness. I will say that my teenage daughter and her friends, none of them like the ads or video clips that automatically start when you feed.
Give them choice.
Universally, it's like, stop.
But they do. But targeting done right, they do like, right? They, especially men like things pushed to them, right? There's nothing better than getting a prompt that I need to buy flowers for Mother's Day or Office Administrator Day. Whoever invented that. But anyway, that's a great targeted push. Click here, buy flowers, order. They show up tomorrow. That's awesome, right?
Because you'll be a hero.
Super valuable,
Yeah.
right?
Or if they can scrape all the information off your wife's phone, give you sizes, preferences, her shopping data.
Okay, now we're crossing
Bad
over the line
idea,
into the
anyone
creepy.
who's out there.
Right.
Now, if you gave me an agent that I could grant some rights to and say, hey, you can go give my husband that information. That's cool. I'm happy with that. But I think it does need to be sort of very permission-based, right?
But
there does need to be choice and transparency in those engagements.
There's a big push in ad tech, which we fund a lot, around native advertising, making more of an experience that's native to Twitter, to mobile, to applications, which is really a great user experience, but it definitely heightens the privacy issue. So there's got to be an easier way for the consumer choice to be able to self-direct how things get targeted and how their information gets used, because advertisers are getting good at sneaking that stuff in where it looks like advertainment.
And I can tell you from the regulator's perspective, we're watching native advertising.
Yeah.
I think native advertising is the next step, but if you're not honest, if you're not clear and transparent that it's an ad, and that's true for sponsored content, testimonials. I mean, this is not new.
You might get another
ground,
call from
but
my office.
A different call.
So, teeing off of that, and in the spirit of Data Privacy Day, which is what we're in support of here today, right? Which is a lot about consumer education and empowerment. Let me ask each of you, what should the people in this room be doing to protect their privacy? What's one thing that you would counsel these folks to do?
Well, of course, it's hard to know, and one assumes that if you're here, you're already, sophisticated and interested and aware. I think I would definitely support the notion that more companies should start looking at privacy as a way to enhance their brand, a way to distinguish themselves, as a way to attract customers, as a way to generate revenue, as opposed to simply be a compliance issue, and a cost center. I think that would be good, and that's certainly something as a regulator and as a policymaker, I look for ways to try to incentivize that, and transparency definitely comes to mind as
So
well.
what about as individuals?
So I would turn around to the audience and ask a question, which is how many of you have manually configured the privacy settings on your Facebook account or the mobile apps that your kids are downloading, gone in? So it's not everybody, right?
But it's a lot.
So that's your,
Don't ever tell your 10-year-old a password that you use. Bad things will follow.
Barb?
Those who know me know I can't pick just one thing of anything. So just a couple of thoughts in a category. One is have someone who's a designated expert in, I would say, data use, actually step away from the privacy language, because that creates a lot of emotional boundaries around things that sometimes are very practical. So a data use privacy expert is a privacy professional, and is not necessarily a security expert, is not necessarily an attorney or a compliance expert, but someone who understands data, and in particular someone who can speak to your customers' point of view, to be almost an advocate for your customer. And then along with that, step away from the legalese, step away from the long words, and think about clear, simple communication, something that builds trust in your company and your brand. Because if you do that, there's actually a lot of equity you could build with your customers, and I would say also with your employees, because they'll feel good about supporting and doing and working on what you're doing.
This is not a setup because we've not met before, but Intuit is a remarkable company from a privacy perspective. When you think about the information you have on individuals and corporations, and the fact that unlike the rest of the financial services institution who mostly violate all kinds of privacy policies and share information all over the place, you guys do a really great job of that. Either that or you hide it really well.
No, we do a great job. Thank you.
And especially with Mint, right? I mean, how many people trust Mint? How many people use Mint in their room? Right? So we trust Mint with some pretty sensitive
Check out the
personal
Mint
data.
mobile app privacy short notice and let us know what you think.
It's very good stuff. It's because they have Barb. I have 3 quick things. One is call your mother. She knows nothing about privacy and she needs to. The reverse mortgages people, the social engineers, will go after the softest underbelly. So if you want to avoid cybercrime, call your mother and other people in your life. Talk to people in your church, your communities, your schools, and become your own advocate based on what you know. You don't need to be a privacy expert to be a privacy advocate. The second thing I would say, which Jeff has kind of stolen, but probably would never articulate it quite this way. The thing I always say in our online Safety for Kids program is, treat your password like you do your panties. Make them exotic and private. Don't share your panties with others, and make them very unusual and hard to guess. That works from 3rd grade up till senior centers. It's amazing how that panty line works. And panty lines so rarely do.
Yeah.
That just worked out. And then the final
equivalent to that. What's the male analog for that?
That should be it. Like panty lines just don't work. And the final thing is for developers is create what I call a student council. Every great investment would have been made. I would have been a billionaire many times over had I just talked to teenagers about what they like. So when you're developing product that will be in the hands of young adults, even if it's not geared toward kids per se, kids need the college credit. We need code.org to get out there. We need kids to know about coding and coding structures. So don't be afraid to have a day, whether or not it's happenstance, happens to be kids in your company, bring your kids to work day, or you have a formal, what I call the student council. They're as important as your board, and they know more than your board knows about what to invest in when it comes to data and cool.
Yeah.
I think maybe I'll take 2 angles at it. The first one is from the consumer, us perspective, or friends or kids or whatever. And it was mentioned earlier, but there are so many, if we were around 4 or 5 years ago, there were very few capabilities to actually set your preferences. right? Facebook had a few, then they went to so many, you couldn't figure them out. Now they're back and in an organized way. Most people didn't know that they were being targeted by behavioral ads, right? Based on where they'd gone, what they'd been. Now there's something like a billions, if not trillions, of these icons and ads that are served every single month that lets you set a preference, right? Use the preferences, they're there. And if they're not there, complain about it. If it bothers you, or don't use the service. A lot of times your preference is use or don't use. And I think the more that people don't use, the more that those businesses will realize that and the preferences will come. Because it's much smarter as we work with customers to add those preferences, give people the choice. Few people typically set them, but you get a much better brand and trust because of that. The second thing is we work with businesses. I'm still shocked at how many times we get asked questions of, hey, I was thinking about taking this and tying it with this and doing this, and this would be the outcome, and wouldn't that be great? And you just kind of look at them and you say, well, wow, how would you feel about it if that actually got out and what you were doing became public, Wall Street Journal front page? And the response is always, as soon as you put that mirror up, I mean, I'm not trying to judge, it's just, what do you think? Back to you. The answer is always like, you see the squirming in the chair. And somebody said this last week, and it was like, if the NSA, the most secretive organization probably on the planet, is having the issues that have gone for 9 months and will likely going forward, you just have to assume if you're thinking of a plan that does something like that, it's going to get out. You're going to have a bad day. If it got out on the NSA, what makes you think you're better? So again, a lot of this is kind of common sense. It's real-time judgment. It's if you were on the consumer end of what you're thinking about doing, how would you feel? And just put yourself in your customer's shoes. And that protects you from a lot of mistakes.
I love that. So to wrap things up, I heard a lot of talk about market differentiation and brand values and making privacy a brand ethic and a brand value. I think that's hugely important, and it resonates pretty strongly here. Big data is not counterintuitive to privacy. I think that's something that's great for all of us to keep in mind, and as we go forward and we're talking to our marketing teams and our technology teams, making sure that we're not saying you can't use data, you just have to use it differently. And to sort of paraphrase what you said, Chris, a sort of doctrine of least surprises. Don't let your customers be surprised by how you use data. With that, I would love to turn things over to the audience for Q&A. We've got a couple of microphones in the back, so please hang on until the microphone makes it your way. Any questions for the panel? Got one in front here. There you go. Okay.
Thanks a lot. Hello? Okay. I'm Jordan Novett, writer from VentureBeat, and I cover big data and cloud computing. I talked with some analysts after Google decided to buy Nest, and I tried to figure out what privacy implications there were, and what happened is I just started guessing, and being very suspicious, basically, and skeptical. And basically, Tony Fadell was saying, no, we're not going to let Nest data get to Google. But I think it's ridiculous, frankly, to think that's true. I think it's a slippery slope. Eventually, Google will want to do that. I wanted to see what you guys think. What should people expect, and should people be genuinely freaked out? People were saying, Nest were getting ripped off the walls after that acquisition was announced.
Prognosticators?
Yes, Google will leverage that data. It's Google.
Yeah, I think I would say, from my perspective, I have 3 devices on my wall. None of them have been ripped off yet. But I think that you can't also pay $3.2 billion for a company and not have a plan for how it integrates. And with, I think, the divestiture that you saw of the Motorola handset business, right? They're much more in things for, in that case, patents, but also kind of the IP of the teams that they have forward, and the big play is an advertising one. So will they use that and consolidate that into a privacy policy over time? I expect they will. I expect they'll also do what they've done in the past and say, here's kind of the date and time, and what happened in the past is separate, and what happens going forward goes forward. Might that upset people that do want to rip a $250 device plus some shipping charge unless you bought it at Amazon off the wall and throw it away? Yes, but at that point, that's the decision that they have to make. And I think that the one thing I will give Google credit for is that when they've made changes, I think, to privacy policies and how they've acted, they've done it very transparently. They've told customers well in advance. They popped more notices at consumers than the vast majority of other companies that have made substantive changes. So they've been transparent about it. That doesn't necessarily mean that consumers like it or regulators in Europe like it, but I think that they've been very transparent about what they're doing and giving you advance notice and that change is about to occur.
Next question? Do we have a...
Thanks. My name is Adam Ross, and I'm commercial and privacy counsel for I won't use the word big data, consumer analytics company. But I have a question from a personal perspective as a consumer. Last night, my doctor's office sent me an email saying they are now part of an online health record system by a large SaaS provider of those. And to join the network, I could either register with my Google profile, my Facebook profile, or my Yahoo profile. Or my Microsoft one. I picked the Microsoft one because it knows the least about me. And then I went inside and looked at the settings that I could configure, and there were none. I could either do it or opt out and then lose my access to the health records. And it said it was sharing my birth date. Well, that's all right. My picture, that's fine. But then my friends list and my contact list. So, really, do my friends need to know that I'm having a colonoscopy? So the question really is, when are we going to have something, and neither do you, right? When are we going to have the distinction between choice and meaningful choice? And do we need to move to an EU-style regulation here in the US to have that? Or are we going to get to that more organically?
Yeah, interesting. Well, I do think, we were just talking about this earlier, I do think that health informatics is exploding as an area. I hear it from investors, I hear it from the tech folks. Just speaking as an individual, of course, not on behalf of the Office of the Attorney General, I think that as increasingly intimate information about us gets out there, more people are going to be starting to think about choice and opt-out. Opt-out is, a very controversial topic, obviously, but I do think, and going to the other gentleman's question about, you were really asking about the Internet of Things, right? As digital devices, network digital devices move into our houses. I do think, just sort of politically speaking, I think there's going to be increased pressure to offer meaningful choices, as you put it, and opt-out choices.
There's an interesting point to that, though, too, which is that there is this idea that if you sort of federate identity, it is actually less risk for the company. It's less risk for me because I don't have hundreds of passwords floating around out there, right? So there's this, again, a paradox between this idea of simplification and federation and true trust. So,
and do they need it all?
Right.
Yeah. Right. But federating to an identity provider whose only source of income is reselling data is problematic for me.
Great point.
So I think when you come to an identity provider, many companies have kind of risen and fallen on the shoals of wanting to be the identity provider in the cloud. But that's the thing that makes me nervous is look at the business model and look at what the inevitable transaction is going to be, and that bothers me a great deal.
Yeah, Google launched a health business, right? It was a useful service, but it's creepy, right?
Yeah.
There's no way Google's not going to market that data to pharma companies, right? And so
And I think for you asked about choice and meaningful choice, and meaningful itself is a very conditional term. What's meaningful for you might not be as meaningful for Jeb, for example. I do want to address the last part of your question, which is, I don't think anyone in the room should assume that an EU approach provides more meaningful choice.
No.
Next question?
Actually, none of us need to know you're having a colonoscopy, but I only say that because of personal experience. And Michelle, I think Zuckerberg really had it all wrong, because we know if you're in pursuit of the best boobs, you'd be looking at USC and not Harvard. You mentioned the
I'm not
next.
somebody who knows. So,
You mentioned the next generation, and I do think this is mostly about the next generation. And looking around the room, I think a small majority of the people in the room are 35 plus, 40, 50. And when we were 20 years old or 25 years old, we did not care what we shared. We had no identity. There was nothing to protect. It didn't matter what you shared, but we didn't have all these tools to put out who we are and what we were, and it wasn't the rigor. Today, however, that's the case. Now, 20 years later, a couple of 100,000, a couple of million, a couple of tens of millions later, we have an identity, we have things to lose, we have things to protect. So we're very concerned today about our privacy. But the kids today, what I wonder what the panel has to say about this, because I've wondered about this for a while, the kids today who are 20, 22, 25, who have nothing to protect today. It's all out there, and they're just used to doing this. They have the tools to do this. So 15 or 20 years from now, will it matter to them? If we can put a lid on, and I don't think we ever will be able to put a lid on cybercrime, but if we could, then would it matter? Does it matter that people know their social security number, that they know how much they make, that it's a very different vibe for them? So what do you see down the road in that regard?
Do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'm dying. You're killing me. So this goes back to my piece of advice: is you need a student council, because we've learned. So we have a program at McAfee called the Online Safety Program for Kids, and it is under the NSCA. A lot of us in the room do stuff with it. So last year, after the Newtown shooting, I used to live about a mile from Newtown, and so my personal thing was to go to 27 schools, one for each of the murder victims. And so I talked to thousands of kids and thousands of parents last year, and as it turns out, you're totally wrong. The next generation, I say that with love in my heart. Do kids care about our mortgages? No. Do they have the judgment to understand what it will mean when a college recruiter looks? No. If you ask a 12-year-old who her crush is, she will keep it tighter than the KGB, NSA, and any spook agency combined. If you walk into, and this is one of my favorite, in addition to the panty line, I walk into high schools every time, and they're cool. You know, the little ones are like, oh, yay, they give me a piece of paper with a badge on it that says McAfee, I'm so happy. The cool kids, you know, they're all, whatevs, you know, who's this old lady? And I come in and I go, all right, who in this room pooped today? Curly ones, rabbit pellets, come on. And the kids are like looking, and they're all looking down, and they're hiding, because that is a secret. No one poops in high school. These kids have things to hide. They have relationships with people. They have a persona that they portray in front of their friends, their close friends, their friends from water polo versus their grandmother versus their cousins. They are more nimble on technology at hiding, disclosing, and describing who they are. What they don't have, and where we can provide leadership, is judgment. But I'm so excited about the next generation, because they find out that Snapchat stinks and they're on Wicker tomorrow. Yep. They find out that this persona is for Facebook for college recruiters, and they are buttoned up and singing in the Sunday choir, and they're over there on Friendster or whatever the new Vine thing is, twerking like Miley Cyrus. So, although my daughter doesn't, so another little just general tip for you if you have tweens like I do. If you twerk and you are a middle-aged woman wearing, Target-bought underoos, they will twerk no more. It is suddenly very uncool.
How do I follow that?
I know.
But
A demonstration.
Oh God. But yet I do have thoughts on the
Yes.
same topic. So as a parent of teens, slightly older, and I was actually having a conversation with my daughter and my son. So my son is a freshman in college, my daughter is a junior in high school, because there was an article very recently that talked about some recent research about young people, and it's the classic, young people don't care about privacy. I'm so tired of that headline, because I know, Michelle
Only
knows,
people
Mel knows,
that don't talk to kids say that.
that they do think about it differently, and I actually think that's important to understand. A student council can help with that. I think one of the, I don't know, paradoxes, but shifts in privacy is that it's become much more, I would say, me-centered, individual-centered. So whether it's social media or even your little device you got there, Chris. It's about me and what I'm doing, and I am actually choosing whether it's visible to the corporation, the enterprise, whether I'm interacting or not. Certainly social media, Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, Tumblr, whatever. Any of those things. The kids actually pick and choose, and they may not use, for example, just using Facebook as an example, creating custom lists. Now, I use custom lists because they're things that I would share with my close friends that I really don't need my family to know. But a lot of people don't know you can do that. A lot of people don't want their name with an ad. You can go into the ad places, just change that setting, but most people don't know that's there because it's not a privacy setting. It's a different setting somewhere else. Kids have actually learned how to do that, and they know where it is, and they know how to sculpt their personas depending upon which group they're interacting with, whether it's their friends who are passionate about Doctor Who or Benedict Cumberbatch in that version of Sherlock, or whether it's their band friends or their sports friends or their parents or their family. They actually do more about managing their persona, i.e. their identity for different audiences than we could possibly give them credit for. And they're not thinking about college apps or recruitment apps, but they're thinking about who they are. And it's actually a classic time to think about, that's when you're forming your identity. So kids are actually actively thinking about that in a way probably that we're not.
And I think that actually points to another really interesting social issue, which is that they're going to shape the way that our social mores and standards exist 15 years from now too. And those will be different than they are today. Recruiters will be different than they are today. So I think knowing that and knowing that those two things are happening in parallel is really important.
And some social standards are universal and will never go away, which is human dignity and respect. And having had a local girl who committed suicide because of cyberbullying, and there were photos that were all over social media and what was done to her. This is Audrey Pott, in our community, in our family, and it's shocking. Yeah. Our kids see that. They know that. They know that happens before we know it happens. So those social norms don't change. And that's where we actually need to step in and educate our kids.
Just to bookend your comments, I agree with both of you. I do think that kids are increasingly sophisticated, especially younger kids, when it comes to sort of controlling their privacy. But I don't think that private sector companies should infer from that there isn't risk there. And in fact, I think there is. I think that as a regulator, and in terms of, when I think of our role as an enforcer, I see companies not being careful when it comes to kids under 13, and their privacy policies. And I got to tell you, as a career prosecutor, as an enforcer, that's the kind of case that I would happily go after if there was somebody sort of misusing children's personal information.
Yeah, so it's not just kids. So I'll give you a concrete example. I went to CES a couple weeks back, and if you've ever been to CES, the taxi lines are like an hour and a half. You will sell body parts to get into a taxi to go anywhere. So there's an app, and these kids running around in their matching little app outfits, and they say it's like a rideshare app. And so I go into and I look at it, and basically the premise is you buddy up with someone for a ride. So first thing I do, I say, where are you guys based? California. There's no privacy policy. I said, que no bueno. First of all, you guys don't have a privacy policy. And they thought, oh, boring, what's this old lady? Secondly, I said, well, how does this thing work? Well, you put in your real email address and your name, and you say the hotel that you're at. So I'm like, what do you call this, the Rate Me I'm Alone app? This is no good. I said, this could be made so much better if you just made me like the rabid squirrel and I'm going somewhere the same place as the rabid bunny. But to say that someone alone in a place is going to a certain location on their own, probably late at night, to hop a taxi line, maybe intoxicated because it is Vegas, and things that happen in Vegas do leave Vegas these days. So I think it's not just the kids, it's the implication of how these things are actually used in the wild, and little tweaks could just make them so much more safer for all of us.
Yeah. Next question.
So I just had one question. Tom Widgery, heading up the Privacy Department, Silicon Valley Bank. Harm thresholds and the value of identity. And what does the panel feel about if the courts did take an approach and finally prescribe some sort of value to the loss of identity, how that would change the privacy ecosystem?
I think they have. I mean, I think Larry Poneman comes out pretty regularly with his breach response studies, and part of that is penalties and fines, and part of that is just the administrative costs. I think Sony's at, what, 300 million and counting, and God knows what Target has lost. And by the way, you're my banker, and thank you, chip and pin man. I have a chip and pin card, so that's a good thing.
Yep.
Yep.
Hello, folks. I've had the pleasure of serving in times past in the Churchill board for more than a decade, and the privilege of being president on 2 terms. And I'm really interested in this topic, and I want to thank you on behalf of the club, even though I have no formal capacity, for pitching up and doing such a wonderful job. I wanted to tell Barbara that I'm going to interrogate my refrigerator tonight.
Let me know what it says.
Yeah, I'll send you an email. And I should tell Michelle that I represented the selling group for MySpace at Sale to News Corp. So, but I have a question that's more philosophical. And I understand from a legal perspective, and we have obviously attorneys and prosecutors or former prosecutors on the panel here, that an individual datum is not able to be owned by an individual. And yet, the aggregation of data, the things that Axiom or Experian sells, the information that's collected by a Google or a Facebook or a myriad of other applications, social or otherwise, have enormous value. And so that datum translates in some sense into information, and that information into a story. And I also understand that if I write a story, it could be a personal story, it could be quasi-autobiographical, I can own that. And yet I've lost control of this now very robust story that's been assembled through the aggregation of data from multiple sources. Doesn't that seem unfair, or an unfair bargain in terms of the value of the services rendered to me versus the value of the story that's been able to be assembled about me? Thank you.
Sounds like you've been reading some books by Jaron Lanier, perhaps.
Well, or the GAO report in September.
But it's also the classic case, right? So think about, so I came out of IP law, was where I got my start, at patents in particular. There's a very famous case about the phone book, of course, of you know, at what point is it an artistic expression or a derivative work versus something that you can individually own? And then there's the other side of the patent law of, you know, when is something a mathematical formula and thus not ownable because it is a law of either nature of analytics or mathematical formula. And I just think that frontier hasn't really quite been crossed just yet. But I know at the IP bar, where I am not qualified to practice anymore, I'm a pre-Festo patent person, but I do keep up on it. And I think it is the new frontier, and there are a number of startups that I have talked to that want you to have this personal data economy where you get, you know, some fraction of a penny in return for your time and effort. I think that's coming, but I don't think we're here for another decade. But I don't know, I'll talk to the venture people, know more than I do.
I think that's definitely new frontier. Ownership of data is interesting on the enterprise side, though, too. We talked before about some of the issues of onboarding employees now and the data they bring with them. And a bigger issue, and I'm sure you guys deal with this at big companies, is what you do when you deprovision an employee when they leave. There's no worse way to upset your employee than wiping their baby pictures off of their phone when you're trying to wipe the device. And so that idea of ownership of data, which we dealt with when email first came out, right, and who had the rights to the email, has come back now in the bring your own device, bring your own app environment of who owns that data.
I think it's interesting, back to one of the things Fatemeh said earlier that applies is, one of the things that we've done at TRUSTe is we're one of these people that serves like these ad choices icons, which is essentially a dumb system for opt-out, right? So your choice is, it's an ad choice mechanism, but your only choice is nuke all these companies I've never heard of. Because you're seeing a Nike ad and you're getting choices to, you know, no more double click by Google ads and a bunch of people you've never heard of, that being the only one you have heard of. And we started to test some things back to this point of, you know, do consumers want to engage? Do they want to give you real preferences, right? And it's very early in some testing phases, but what we found is if someone used to opt out and got to that page where they actually set a preference of, you know, nuke these ad networks or some of them, they're 4 times more likely to give us a piece of information. And what we've just put in there is simple categories. Like, do you like automotive? Yes or no? Do you like travel? Yes or no? And we're getting 4 times the click rate, and of that, the opt-out rate's decreasing 92%. So there's an element to this of, back to this kind of transparency choice framework, consumers, when they have that capability, when they understand what's happening, and when they're given the opportunity to kind of collect some of that back, and we're not giving them an offer, we're just asking them the question. This doesn't include the, would you like a fraction of the penny that you were probably worth for that little piece of data. They're starting to give us those preferences and engage in that way. So I think it's very early stages in this whole dynamic, but consumers are wanting to kind of pull this stuff back in. I don't think a lot of cases, particularly in the ad space, they ever understood they'd let it go, to your point. But now that they're understanding that better and given the opportunity, they're trying to pull it back in and manage it themselves. So like I said, we'll see. It's early stages, but you see Google doing it in their ads themselves in a direct way. You see Yahoo starting to do it. It's not just the opt-out, it's the, would you like to reset your preferences and give us feedback so we can improve in this offer to you?
And to that point too, Acxiom now has their About the Data portal, right, which you can actually go in and look at what they know about you ostensibly. And they initially thought they were going to get something like 2% opt-outs of people who actually visited the site, and they've had 1/10 or less of that. And it's mostly people going in and revising their profiles and saying, just do this better for me.
Yeah.
So I think that's exactly right, Chris. Last question. Right there? Do we have a mic over there? Oh, great.
Hi, Rudy Berger, Woodside Capital. So I'm listening to the debate here, and I'm worried that we're talking about the wrong thing. There seems to be an underlying assumption that we're all bringing to this discussion, that because so much of the data and information about all of us is already out in the cloud, that all we can really do is tune and try to sort of draw some lines and try to sort of put band-aids on it and figure out how to best manage this situation. I'm left wondering why we're not having a more fundamental discussion about why this information doesn't belong to each one of us. That information about who I am, what I do, my choices belongs to me and is not available and for commercialization by some company that I have no relationship with. There was an individual here earlier on wearing Google glasses. I have no idea whether they were recording me, recording you. Why is that okay? That may now be up in the cloud. So I think that's a debate we should be having, and not, this sort of, well, it's happening, so how do we manage it?
The simple answer to your question, I think, is consumers like free stuff. And the trade-off of free is you get targeted with advertising. That's been sort of the history of a lot of content consumption, right?
I also think there's a problem of again, the idea of ownership is a very difficult one, right? Data is sort of infinitely replicable without losing fidelity, without losing intrinsic value. So how do you talk about ownership in the context of that? And I think that any one of these companies would say, sure, if you made a transaction with me, I own some of that data. I have a right to know what you bought. I have a right to be able to service you. So I think the idea of ownership is just a very, very difficult one when it comes to data. I don't know what you guys think.
It's autonomy, it's control and ownership, and I think there's a continuum, and it's a really challenging topic. And there's different legal philosophies around that. There's different, I think, moral and personal philosophies around it. I feel like that's almost a distinctly separate, not just separate discussion, but it's distinct discussion on its own that's a corollary to what we've been talking about today, but it's a different kind of discussion than what we've talked about today.
And I don't think it's anathema. I think you do own your data. You are yourself. You get to tell your own story. But it's also true that people observe you in the world, and people always have done. We can do it faster now. We can do it, less in your present. But when I used to live in a really small town when I was a kid, 1,900 people. People knew my mom and dad, and they assigned me the title of good kid. So a good kid got to go home when we got busted down by the river. It was a long time ago. Statute of limitations, long gone. Long gone. There may have been something that I did not inhale. But there was and I really didn't. It was it was 12 kids and a 6-pack of beer. And I literally, the cop said, oh, you're Norma's daughter. If you're home in 30 minutes, you're fine. But my boyfriend got scruffed of the neck and got called in downtown because he was assigned, and he actually was a good kid. He's an engineer now, so maybe he's a bad kid, I don't know. But he got hauled in, and mom and dad had to come and pick him up at the station. And what was that based on? And didn't we own our own rights and our own stories at that time? Yeah, of course we did. But we were observed, and judgments were made. And I think that's the kind of the crux of it, is who gets to decide? Do we get to decide what the decisions are made about us, and do we have a say-so, and is there a fair hearing? And what does that mean? I think that's a great philosophical question that's never far from my design when I'm thinking about things.
And reputation constructed by you and by others, by inference.
And personalized data applied the right way is invaluable, right? Amazon, Netflix, Google we've been picking on, but think how much value they deliver by what they know about you.
Or your doctor, he's got to do that colonoscopy. He's got to know where to put that thing. Data is important.
On behalf of all of our attendees and the Churchill Club, I'd like to thank our speakers again so much for sharing your views so openly and candidly. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Well, I need to be more candid.